My dear friend Marcia was known in my house during homeschooling years as Mrs. Maths. I don't think she knew that, but I admired her ability and her natural love of maths. I'm sitting down today to have a chat over a cup of coffee with her and asking her to dig down and recall her homeschooling memories of how she went about teaching maths to her children. I just know that you're going to benefit out of this chat. Marcia, can you address the homeschooling mum who is starting out and is probably feeling overwhelmed? What is the first thing she should do?
Okay, first of all, if you are homeschooling your children, you need to get your head around it for yourself. Have an end goal in mind. Do you want your child to be university qualified for maths by the time they're 18? Or do you just want to get them to year 9 and you're pretty sure that from there on, the high school teachers will take over? So have goals in mind. I know that homeschool mothers particularly are going to be anxious about covering all the right stuff in any given year, and there will be a fear that it's going to be harder than they can do, usually because they have memories themselves of failing maths tests at school. What I would recommend is, say your child is going to be in year 7 or year 8, go to Whitcoulls or Paper Plus, any New Zealand bookstore, and just say you want the workbook for that year. And then if you just look at the contents list of that book, that will be everything that they're going to cover that year. There'll probably be a section on number skills. There'll be a section on area and volume. Read that chapter list yourself and you'll probably find that there's nothing in there you don't understand. Even if you feel like you don't know how to do fractions, you recognize what a fraction is, and you'll see that there's a section in the book on fractions. That doesn't mean you have to do every question on every page of the book. Nobody's got that much time. That would be boring. That would destroy your child's love of maths and your sanity, probably, if you tried to make them do it. You can just do a bit of this and a bit of that. I think it's all right to be hodgepodge, but on days where I think we haven't done enough maths this week, let's just get the book, randomly flip it open. I honestly did this and go, well, here's a section on area. That looks like it's something useful. Here, let's do these problems.
Use it as a resource so you know what they should be using at each age. How would you suggest, say, teaching fractions? What hands-on stuff? What do you do?
Well, when children are young, the main fractions that you want them to understand are halves and quarters. You've got this many people and one watermelon, so you're going to cut the watermelon into pieces. So in the kitchen, fractions come up most naturally. Or if you've got Cuisenaire rods or blocks or some sort of manipulative. I was never great at having a whole cupboard full of, correct manipulatives that are award-winning and wonderful and things. But if you have, then I know they are really good. To see how this many of this number of shape will fit inside this shape, that means that this shape must be a quarter of this shape, that sort of thing. But fractions are pretty basic, and we make them more complicated than they have to be at high school. So there's an area where I'd say understand fractions without reaching for the calculator straight away, because there's a fraction button now on the calculator and kids get used to using it, and so they actually don't know what a fraction is. They just know that if I see that problem, I use this button on the calculator and that gives me the right answer, and that is getting a right answer without understanding what fractions mean. There's a book that I recommend for adults, and there are several similar books, but this one that I'm going to recommend, it's called Everyday Maths for Grown-Ups. And I used it when I was teaching my daughters as well. My daughters both resisted maths lessons and didn't like it, and so I realized I just wanted them to know what every functional adult needs to know. And so I thought, well, where's that list? Because you're not going to get that from any year level textbook. So this book and others similar give you that list of what is useful maths to know as a functioning adult in the world. You want them to be able to understand their payslip, understand issues of equity. You actually can't do that if you can't interpret data a little bit. And you want them to be able to not be scared of negative numbers, be able to do some measurement conversions, know what a hectare is. These are all useful, normal, relatable math skills. So a book like Everyday Maths for Grown-Ups by Jatin Poskett, who also wrote a wonderful series of books for adults and kids called Murderous Maths, just to get confident with what the list is that you're heading towards. And if at any point you go, I don't know what maths to do, just find something in that book and do that. And Google it and use Khan Academy and other wonderful resources. Get other teachers online to do the teaching.
So potentially you wouldn't actually have to use a maths textbook until well into high school years when they need to prepare for exams?
Absolutely. Oh. You don't need to buy or use a maths textbook, like a big fat book, until maybe NCA level 1 or Cambridge or whatever path you want to follow for a high school qualification, because the equivalent resources are online and in other books. However, don't make the mistake of thinking you can learn and practice all the maths you know without ever using pen and paper. Even if you're using an online program like Education Perfect or Mathletics, which are wonderful for teaching and practicing maths, if they're only doing it online and typing in their answers and not working it out with a pen and paper, then they're not making the best connections in their brain for understanding the maths.
Where's the cut-off then, for the practicality sake of it, of what you need to know to work out on pen and paper, and when you should just go, I'm heading to the calculator and I don't need to work it out?
Really good question, and something that is regularly debated in schools and homes. Because when we went to school, we were told you have to learn how to do this on paper because you aren't always going to have a calculator in your pocket. Well, the fact is that now most kids have a supercomputer in their pocket, and that is their phone. Something that can quickly do the crunching, the calculation of stuff. So do they have to know how to do long division or add together 4 numbers that all have many columns and decimals and things? I like saying that they do still know how to usefully do the column method of addition and subtraction and multiplication. I hesitate to say long division of anything more complicated than a certain number divided by like 6 or 9, or if you're dividing by a double digit number and you have to do all those rows, no one does that anymore. We don't teach them how to do that in school. It's never expected at any point of their education to do long division on paper, so why would you? The column method for adding and subtracting actually really helps them learn about how numbers work and what those columns are. Because I've seen a question in a Year 9 maths test, what does the 5 mean in this number, 1,542? And the correct answer is it means 500. And I've seen kids baffled. They don't know what the number means. It's just that's the digit that comes second in that number, instead of thinking that's the hundreds column. So you do want them to understand, you want them to understand numbers. So the column method for adding and subtracting I would recommend, where you either carry things and whatever method you're using, it's worth practicing that. There's some good skill in there. Don't make them do pages and pages and pages of it. And I've seen a certain curriculum that doesn't even let them use a calculator until they're Year 9, and that's not good either, because when they do pick up a calculator, you want them to know how to use it. And I've seen this as well. They don't know what to put into the calculator. Sometimes you need brackets. Things have to be done in the right order. It's a combination, and it's a good skill to be able to work things out on paper and not always rely on the calculator.
For a non-maths mum, which I consider myself as, I used to refer to you in our house as Mrs. Maths, and I found your opinion so helpful. What would you recommend to somebody like me who was never particularly good at maths but needs to know how to teach their children and how to do right by them? You don't want gaps in their life. You need to prepare them for life, but not necessarily university. So starting, say, with early primary school, as they're moving up through into intermediate and into high school, what are your non-negotiables?
Okay, first of all, I would want to reassure that mum, there are going to be gaps, and that is fine. And by the time they're 18, 19, they will fill those gaps. Something will come up and they'll go, oh, I never learnt that. Oh, hang on, I'll look it up now. So do not fear that your gaps are going to mean that your child can't have the life that you dream for them. I don't think I taught my children nearly enough French history, for example, and yet they're fine. And if anything comes up, oh, I don't know that about Napoleon, I'll look it up. Oh, look, now I know it. You do need a few more, you do need the foundational skills to get the higher level skills. You recognise the gaps later, and if you're learning and if you've learnt how to learn, the gaps will be filled.
I like that, if you've learnt how to learn. So teach your child how to learn.
I don't know exactly how to describe how to teach them how to learn, except you have lots of practice learning things, because there's different ways of learning things. Don't fall into the trap of thinking I have to find out my child's learning style and they're either going to be visual or kinesthetic or auditory or something else. Let me just spell that myth right now. Everybody can learn all different ways, and some people might have a preferred thing, but don't think, oh no, they're a visual learner so they can't learn it this other way, or oh no, they're not a visual learner. Just try all the different ways. It'll be fine.
Oh, let's go and pop that balloon then, hasn't it?
Yep, and you can still look it up and get books about all the different learning styles, but you can also read the research papers that have quite thoroughly disproved it. How did I get onto that particular
bugbear? That's helpful, because it is something that is still a strong theory or way of thinking out there, and it tends to kind of funnel you into doing something in a certain way, which is unnecessarily complicated.
Yeah, or you think, oh no, I'm doing it wrong.
Ruining my child.
Yeah, you really won't. Oh, I wish I could show some homeschooling mothers the disasters that we see in the Year 9 classroom. The kids that can barely count, that can't add 6 and 3 together without reaching for a calculator. You were going to do better than that. The one mathsy thing that you do want to drill and practice regularly is just those basic maths facts. The times tables, adding numbers together in patterns, so all the doubles, 7 plus 7, 8 plus 8, 9 plus 9. And I remember going for walks with especially my girls. My son never needed a lot of input from me, but especially with my girls. And even though they didn't like it, I would drill things. We would, as we were going up the hill, I would just be firing questions at them and expect instant recall. And just repeat, and then do it again the next week.
So there's a place for learning things by rote.
There, absolutely. You want those basic number facts to just be automatic. Because if they're not, if you're working on something at a higher level and they don't know the basic maths facts, well, yes, they can work it out at the time, but that becomes another thing that they then have to work out at the time, which fills up their working brain capacity when you want them to be thinking about this higher thing. That's why maths progresses. They have to know and be able to do the foundational basic skills before they can do trig identities in level 3 calculus. Fairly confident if you're homeschooling, you can pretty much leave everything until that brain maturity that starts kicking in around puberty. You can plug all the gaps, but you're going to spend a lot of time doing that. I mean, there were weeks where we did nothing but maths. I remember that.
And that's your privilege
as a privilege as a homeschooler.
Because there's many parents now taking their children out of school.
I know. It's shooting up. It's so good. But it's also, does it make you wonder if MOE is now going to start monitoring them a lot more closely?
We'll see. We will see. But in the meantime, we have many mums and dads, and there are many reasons why they're taking their children out of school at the moment. One of which you've just referred to is that they actually saw what their kids were learning and, more importantly, were not learning. So they need a list. What's your basic list of, let's start with a primary school child. What would you recommend they did first?
The New Zealand curriculum is all available online, and there are actually lists. It's complicated for parents to work out what key stage they think they're at to, because there's year levels and then there's curriculum levels and they don't match. But you would find, so year 7 or 8, I think you'd expect them to be at about curriculum level 2 or 3 or 4, and you can look all this up or ask their last teacher or ask any teacher of that year group what curriculum level, and then you just look up, okay, for maths curriculum level, you would expect them to be able to know how to find area and volume of basic shapes, measure things in a straight line, how to add whole numbers together, meaning not necessarily fractions and stuff. So you can find those lists and then you just work through it. And have the confidence that there's not going to be anything on that list that a capable adult isn't capable of. Don't be afraid of year 7, 8, even year 9 maths. The reaction we get from parents when we're talking to them about their child's year 9 maths and they go, oh, well, I can't help them. Really? You mean you can't find the area of a square either? Because there's something wrong there. Surely you can, or you could look it up. Got to bolster your own confidence, and that's where that book really comes in, because it's written for adults. Here's how to do all the basic maths things that any adult needs to do, because these are the things you want your child to be able to do.
I think you've probably touched on something that's even more important than teaching maths if you're a homeschool parent now, and that's confidence. Because so many of us grew up with this belief we can either remember a teacher or a parent telling us we were dumb, or we absorbed passively that we were just dumb.
Yeah, we just learn that it's hard and we can't do it.
So when we started homeschooling, in my school C year, which we do when we're 15, I scraped through maths at 55%.
Okay.
So I entered into homeschooling with this belief, well, what use am I going to be to my child?
Yeah, you did, and that's a damaging belief.
But because we were determined that we were going to homeschool our children, I had to turn around. If that was a dragon in my life, and it was, I had to turn around and face that dragon and look it in the eye, and then actually suddenly realize, you're not as big and as scary as what I thought you were. I can do this.
Good.
So when I reached the point where I could not, I deferred to my husband, who is a more maths able person than me. Then we started to outsource our maths tutoring, especially when they started to get up into high school years, because I knew what I didn't know, and I outsourced that which I knew I didn't, and got on and did what I knew I did know. So that's a helpful thing. So just going back to those mums especially, because mostly it's the mothers who are now going to take up this mantle of homeschooling their children, and many of them find it really daunting. My son on his LinkedIn page was regularly seeing posts that were appealing for help because they were homeschooling their children during lockdown, and they were so afraid that they were messing their child up.
And we're talking about 7 and 8 year olds, right? Because I read those posts and go, no, you're not messing them up. Just play Monopoly. Just read to them. You don't need a maths tutor when they're 8.
So what are some practical maths games that don't cost a lot of money, that you may actually have already at home? What would you recommend?
Number 1, a deck of cards. A deck of playing cards. 52 cards, 4 suits. There's 13 cards in each suit. Straight away you can learn that 52 divided by 4 is 13, which is something that those of us that have played cards for many years don't ever think about. Children at school have no idea if they haven't played cards. I would set up some sort of probability question, because cards and dice are your go-to tools if you're teaching probability in the classroom, and say, imagine you're playing cards and you're going to get a card. What's the chance that it's a jack of spades? Well, it's 1 in 52, but if you don't know there are 52 cards in a deck because you haven't grown up playing cards, then that's just an impossible question. And they just go, I don't know, I'm dumb, I can't do this maths. So play cards.
Play cards.
Yeah, look up lots of different card games. They don't have to be specific maths games. There are skills that are so helpful in learning higher level maths that you get just from playing games, whether they're actually maths games, because they're learning logic, they're learning patience and being able to puzzle over something until you get it. So doing logic puzzles like Sudoku, it looks like you're having fun and you're just trying to solve a puzzle, and you are. But later on in 3rd year calculus, you're trying to work out a trig identity problem. And if you haven't got that patience and that ability to just puzzle it out and try a few different things until you find the one that works, you can throw your pencil down and go, I can't do this, maths is hard. If you've solved puzzles all your life, you've got a skill set to draw on. Patiently puzzling something out is something we don't often see happening much in class.
What else would you recommend?
Monopoly, and there's a quick version of Monopoly now. If old Monopoly,
there's
Monopoly Deal. It's a card game. Yeah, so you've still got the money counting skills that are coming in and working out whether you can afford to do things, and not modern Monopoly where you've got an FPOS card and it's all automatic. You want to handle that cash and be passing it around. But I would say don't just look for maths games, just play games because of all the other skills that go in there, and you'd be amazed at what skills are being learned that will be applied later to maths that you might not have thought of at the time as math skills. Losing graciously. Actually reaching the point where you can't do the puzzle, you need to ask for help. Finding where that point is and then trying again. All of that is so good for learning maths later.
So the way you're describing maths then is finding for a homeschool family what you can do just simply in everyday life. Rather than treat maths as a subject that we do at a certain time of the day for a certain amount of time, you can find maths opportunities anytime.
Yes and no. I mean, my approach to homeschooling when the children were younger, so we're talking up to intermediate high school age, it's very random. Some weeks there was definitely more educational stuff going on than other weeks. But I did reflect each week on, okay, how much reading are we doing? How much writing is going on? How much maths is actually happening? And I would intentionally make sure maths was happening. We had, what was it called? Mathletics, a really good website that we were signed up to. And so if nothing else, it would be, have you done half an hour of mathletics today? So I would still get that going, not when they were little, like when they were old enough that it felt like they should be doing a bit more maths, you know, when you just go, oh. That was a pretty hands-off thing for me. It was babysitting as well. It was fun for them. It was back in the day, a family had one computer and everyone had to take turns. So they would have their half hour of doing mathletics. Oh my goodness.
What about Khan Academy?
I discovered Khan Academy later. My son, who taught himself all higher level maths, so he taught himself, and I know Khan Academy was a great resource for him, and I've used it in the classroom in school, and I recommend it to my students and to any parent. Khan Academy is great. If you don't know the best way to explain how to put a straight line on a graph, watch them do it and use that as your lessons. Absolutely, and it's free.
Oh, that's even better.
Yeah, Khan Academy is fantastic.
And if you fill those gaps with your child at home, is that part of that teaching them to know how to learn?
Yes.
How to think?
Yes, absolutely. If you're reading the news together or watching the news together and looking up alternate news sources, then you're going to be teaching them critically thinking just by modelling it and helping them to do it.
Could that actually be part of the maths curriculum, if you like, for especially a teenager, that if you're learning about the social justice teachings or the ideology that's around, how are you going to use that as an example to teach them? They're claiming lack of equality, lack of equity. How can you help them to assess that and work out that the ideology might not actually be what it's presenting itself to be?
So in the maths curriculum, and we do have this in the curriculum, you want to teach them how to analyse data, do multivariate data analysis. So the skill that you're teaching is how to interpret data and make conclusions about different groups within that data, and whether there's other variables coming into play apart from the agenda. So you can do that in many contexts and then use it in many contexts, whether it's talking about gender equity or race equity or other things. So the skill that you teach when you have a big data set is to notice all the variables. You're teaching them to look for patterns. It's interesting that you hear people today arguing for social justice and equity in society. How are you going to know if there's a gender pay gap if you don't know how to analyse the data and do the maths? They just take it that there is, and it's something that they should campaign and march about. And then when you can show them, give them some reason to doubt that mantra, then they get confused and actually very uncomfortable. I've had some awkward conversations with teenage girls who thought that they knew there was a gender pay equity gap and this is a terrible thing. And I just explained to them that as a secondary teacher, I'm paid exactly the same as every other secondary teacher of my qualification and experience, no matter what the gender. What's the problem? Should I be paid more because I'm a woman? And they go, oh no. And then they don't know what to say next. They don't know how to analyse data and work out if we actually have a gender equity pay gap problem or not.
What would you then tell those young girls who are convinced of an ideology to work backwards and actually work out, is this equity thing real?
Yeah, it's hard to get them to back off an ideology when actually they don't have the math skills to back it up. They're just going off what they've headlines. They don't even have the literacy skills to analyse the article that they read in the media to see whether it's spinning it or not.
Because maths is either right or wrong, isn't it?
Yes. Well, the answer is either right or wrong.
True.
And there can be more than one process to get to the answer, and that's totally fine.
So if that is off-putting to a mother who's trying to choose what a good curriculum is, what would you suggest?
I would just say look at the New Zealand curriculum. Our New Zealand maths curriculum is surprisingly good. And I know people are put off going through the New Zealand school system because of all the other stuff that's in there. But when it comes to maths, the maths is just maths, and it's fine. If they take it as far as level 1 and then no more, that's absolutely fine. They will know how to count and add. They may or may not know their times tables. It's not actually in the curriculum. I would encourage them to know their times tables. But everything that they could do by the end of it are basically what you'd want them to do. There's no glaring omissions. And the curriculum doesn't dictate how it should be taught. So that is just a matter of which school you end up at, which teacher you get. Obviously, all the teachers can do the maths. Just depends on the luck of the draw, who else is in that class with you and what activities you connect with and not. But the curriculum is fine. There's no problem with what the Ministry of Education has decided New Zealand students should be taught. I think it's good. There is an imbalance in our education system in general of what's prioritised educationally. Possibly, or maybe it's just the way society is. I don't know, because like I say, the maths curriculum is good, but it's clearly not getting embedded into the brains of our kids. So maths is still maths. The content isn't really changing that much. Just how it's being siloed and delivered is changing a bit. So I know NCA is a whole big ball game that most parents aren't prepared for, and it takes a while to get your head around it. But imagine a smorgasbord of different subjects that you can study and then get tested on. And by the end of it, across all subjects, you want to have 80 credits. And it's been possible to get those 80 credits without doing any exams and without doing very much maths at all. In fact, it's kind of winding back more towards a model that we would recognise from our old school C days, where you do some testing during the year, but there are high stakes exams again that you must pass. Otherwise, you won't be certified as having passed level 1 or level 2. I think that's good.
You say they're returning to that?
Yeah, they're going back to that old school model because they're finding that kids are coming through with NCEA on paper. They have passed level 1 and level 2 maths, and they can't add 6 and 4 without reaching for a calculator. You know, they don't actually have the skills that the paper says they have.
But how many years have we now got a great collection of young adults now who actually don't have those skills?
I don't know. So I came into teaching once NCEA was already firmly established, and I left school having gone through school certificate and university entrance exams. So I was at the end of that. I missed the start of NCEA not being implemented, and now I've just been a teacher of NCEA. So I don't know. I left school in the late 80s. That's when it was all changing. So it's been 30 years. I mean, some are fine. If you can go through and pass NCEA level 3 maths, you definitely have those. You can do calculus. It's the ones that are getting NCEA numeracy, so those first 10 level 1 credits that you have to have before you can get not before you can get anything else, but you can't get NCEA unless you've got these 10 level 1 numeracy credits. Those have been given very generously, and they've been given even in non-math subjects. Like if you can draw a graph and here's what the graph should look like, now you copy it, okay, we'll give you 4 credits. It's really that bad.
So it's not particularly helpful for their future as an adult in a career or an earning capacity. So
they'll just go on to go, oh, I'm just not a maths person, and think that that's okay. I don't think it's okay for anyone to just comfortably have that label. I don't think we should say that about ourselves. You'd never say, oh, I'm just not a languages person, I can't read.
It's just making me think, if you're an adult that falls into that category and you just think you're dumb or you're not a maths person, is it ever too late? What are some practical steps that this group of people can now go back and train that part of their brain that's never been nourished?
Everyday maths for grown-ups. Never too late, even for you.
No. Well, as an exercise for my mind, being conscious now as I'm aging, wherever I can, I'm trying to work out basic things with literally pen and paper, forcing my brain to exercise those muscles. So that can only be good for me.
Yeah. I mean, I'm doing that too. Now that I'm working for Education Perfect, I'm so happy. The first week of my job, and I was editing level 3 calculus questions. So I had to remember how to do it. I haven't done it since school pretty much, and helping Isaac a little bit with his homework. I haven't had the chance to teach calculus. I was put into the stats teaching. So I got my calculus book out and I worked it out and I remembered, and then I laid out the working. I photographed it, put it on Facebook. I'm just absolutely loving it. Couldn't swear that this is the book that I read, but it looks very similar. And I have definitely read some of the Murderous Maths books, so I know that he is readable. But if anyone picked up this book and couldn't relate to it, there are others. There are other books along a similar lines. Just, okay, I didn't like maths at school. I feel like I haven't learned it very well. What do I need to know? And he will explain what you need to know.
I do have one more question for you. If you could time travel and go back to your original time start of when you started homeschooling your children, what would you tell yourself?
Just that it's going to work out so well. Maybe worrying about it a bit at the time actually helped it happen, but I would want to reassure myself, your son is going to get an engineering degree. Your daughter is going to go on and do a tertiary level qualification and be following her passions. They are going to be the most wonderful grown-ups who are best friends with each other, and it works. It's worth it. And it's such a privilege. Because I know all the families that would probably love to do it, but they can't afford one of the parents to give up working, and my heart goes out to them. I recognise that it's a privilege, and I'm so grateful that I got to do it.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Thank you, Marcia.